A respected teacher is sentenced to 60 years for a crime he didn't commit, buried by lies, abandoned by justice, until one woman risks everything to uncover the truth. This is not just a story of wrongful conviction. It's a story of redemption, reckoning in one man's rise from the grave of injustice. The courtroom was frozen in silence, as if time had stopped in collective disbelief. Isaac Monroe, only 28, stood shackled in front of Judge Randolph Keating, a man with a reputation for harsh sentences and unshakable pride in his conviction. Record Isaac's suit hung awkwardly on his frame, a second-hand relic borrowed from his uncle. He had no money for better, not after the trial had drained every last cent from his mother's savings. When the sentence came, 60 years, the air was ripped from the room like a punch to the lungs. Isaac didn't flinch. His jaw tightened, but he didn't break. "Not here," his mother wailed from the back, collapsing to her knees, screaming his name as if God might hear. But God hadn't shown up in that courtroom. No angels came, only bailiffs. Judge Keating's voice was like gravel. "Mr. Monroe, you have been found guilty of armed robbery, attempted murder, and aggravated assault. This court sentences you to 60 years in the custody of the state." Isaac turned only once, locking eyes with his mother. He didn't cry. He had done that already, long ago, because he'd known this wasn't about justice, it was about finding a scapegoat. The courtroom emptied with the cold efficiency of a place used to breaking lives. Prosecutor Ellen Stokes exchanged handshakes with Detective Grayson, the man who had built the case. They didn't speak, but the smirk they shared said everything. Job well done. Isaac's defense attorney, public disinterested, overworked, packed up without looking him in the eye. "We'll file an appeal," he muttered. But Isaac had heard that tune before. Appeals were bookmarks in a book no one read. The evidence that condemned him: a blurry surveillance video of a masked man running from a high-end watch boutique, a witness with failing memory who said she recognized Isaac's walk, and an anonymous tip from a burner phone that was never traced. No fingerprints, no stolen goods, just assumptions. Isaac had been at Lanier Middle School the day of the robbery, setting up a parent conference schedule. Cameras were down for maintenance, and the only person who could vouch for him, his student teacher, was never called to testify. None of it mattered. Isaac was a black man from a neglected part of East Memphis. That was enough. That had always been enough. As the steel doors closed behind him, he whispered under his breath, "They got the wrong man." Detective Benjamin Grayson was considered a rising star in the Memphis PD, broad-shouldered, photogenic, and articulate in press conferences. He had been fast-tracked for promotion after a string of headline-grabbing arrests. What no one knew, what no one dared to question, was how perfectly his cases came together. Always airtight, always timely. The robbery at Caldwell and Sons Jewelers had shaken the city. A mass thief had stolen over $200,000 worth of merchandise, pistol-whipped a clerk, and vanished before the squad cars arrived. The public wanted a name. Grayson gave them. Isaac Monroe. First came the tip, an anonymous voicemail that claimed Isaac's voice sounded like the man in the video. It came from a burner phone Grayson had purchased himself 3 days earlier at a gas station across state lines. Then came the witness, Mrs. Adele Pennington, a lonely widow with fading eyesight. Grayson visited her repeatedly, planting suggestions, telling her the man reminded him of a known criminal. Eventually she nodded. Yes, that walk. It could have been Isaac, the pièce de résistance, a black 9mm Glock found in a storage unit under Isaac's name. But Isaac never rented that unit. Grayson had used a forged affidavit and lifted Isaac's fingerprints from a stapler at the school. The whole thing was art, cruel, devastating, irreversible. The prison walls at Portsville State were gray, cracked, and reeked of bleach and despair. Isaac Monroe was assigned to cell 3A, barely large enough to turn around in, let alone breathe. His inmate number 88144 was stitched across a uniform, 2 sizes too big. The guards didn't ask questions. They didn't care who was innocent. They only cared if you obeyed. The inmates cared even less to them. Isaac was fresh meat, quiet, educated, and alone. It didn't take long. The first beating happened 2 weeks in behind the laundry unit. No words, just fists and boots. His ribs cracked, his lips split. Blood filled his mouth. He curled on the floor, unmoving. A guard saw it happen, then walked away. Later, back in his cell, someone had carved into the wall, "Snitch equals dead." But Isaac hadn't spoken to anyone. He stopped eating. His mother had stopped calling. Too many fees. The letters he tried to write felt pointless. Hope, the kind he once carried like a shield, had become a lead weight. Each night he lay on his bunk, counting the cracks in the ceiling, whispering names of former students to stay sane. Their faces blurred, but he repeated them anyway. It was all he had left. One night long after lights out, Isaac heard the wrong door unlock. A guard cursed, slammed it shut, then walked on. It meant nothing. But to Isaac, it meant everything. That door wasn't supposed to open, but it did. For a moment, he sat up, back against the wall, pulse thudding. It was the first time in months he had felt anything other than numb. If that door can open, he whispered, maybe others can too. The next morning he asked for a pencil. The guard laughed and threw him a half-used nub of graphite. Isaac gripped it like a weapon, not to hurt but to build, to fight back. He began drawing timelines on napkins, sketching names, mapping events, cross-referencing everything he remembered from the trial. The missing testimony, the gun with no chain of custody, the burner phone, the storage locker key he never owned. His body was weak, but his mind burned. He rode into the dark, huddled beneath the flickering ceiling light, scratching out his truth piece by piece. Hope wasn't back, not fully, but its silhouette had returned. 2 months into his research, Isaac received a letter, not from family, not from a lawyer, but from Camilo Reyes, a paralegal working with the Southern Justice Initiative, a nonprofit group focused on wrongful convictions in the South. It was short. I read about your case while auditing closed files for training. Something doesn't sit right. If you're willing to answer a few questions, I might be able to help, Reyes. Isaac stared at the letter for hours. Was this real, another setup? A prank. He remembered how his student teacher, Angela Braith, had offered to testify but was never called. Maybe this Camille had seen that. He wrote back, guarded but hopeful. He outlined what he knew. The faulty witness, the hidden alibi, the forged storage unit records. He didn't beg. He didn't cry. He simply told the truth. The system refused to hear. 2 weeks later, she replied. This time the envelope was thick. Inside were copies of original case documents. And at the top of the pile, underlined in red, was the missing detail. The original surveillance footage that had never been entered into evidence. Isaac's heart pounded. They buried the real video. Camille's next letter came with a USB drive. The prison tech officer allowed Isaac to review it during supervised library hours. He sat in a dim cubicle, a cracked monitor buzzing in front of him. The footage loaded slowly. Grainy black and white, the jewelry store interior on the day of the robbery. The man in the video was wearing a mask, but he was tall, stocky, moving with a limp in his left leg. Isaac blinked. That wasn't him. He didn't walk like that. He didn't have that build. Then came the timestamp, 11:42 a.m. Isaac had been at the school at that exact time, setting up for parent night. The timeline alone should have cleared him, but this version had never been shown in court. Instead, Prosecutor Stokes had submitted a cropped version 1 that excluded the moments where the suspect walked, making it impossible to assess their gait. The full version, this version, was kept out of discovery. Intentionally, Camille's handwritten note was brief. If this is real, they suppressed exculpatory evidence. That's a Brady violation. I'm pushing it up the chain. Stay strong. Isaac clutched the paper. For the first time in years, he whispered 3 words he hadn't dared believe I might matter. Camille's inquiries stirred dormant waters. She filed a formal complaint with the state attorney general and petitioned for a judicial review of the conviction. Within weeks, the Department of Justice flagged the case for potential prosecutorial misconduct. Word spread fast in Portsville. Guards began acting strange. Shorter tempers, more shakedowns. One even muttered, "You think you're getting out?" "Don't count on it." Then came Detective Grayson's visit. Isaac was summoned to the visitor's room. When he entered, Grayson was already seated, arms crossed, eyes hard. "You don't know what you're doing," he said low. "That non-profit chick, she's playing with fire." Isaac didn't flinch. "So are you?" Grayson leaned forward. "You think this'll end with some TV moment where they say sorry and let you go? No, you'll die here. And that girl, she'll lose her job." Isaac met his stare. "You forged evidence, buried the footage. That's not just corruption. That's prison time." Grayson smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Only if you can prove it, and I don't leave paper trails." But he was wrong, because Camilo was already digging into a case Grayson had buried years earlier, a nearly identical frame job involving a teenage boy from Raleigh. And this time she wasn't alone. Camille knew she couldn't win this alone. She reached out to Jonathan Lee, a tech forensics expert and former DOJ contractor, who now worked independently on innocence cases. She sent him the original surveillance video, asking him to verify its metadata. 3 days later, Jonathan called her with news that made her skin crawl. The file was edited. The cropping wasn't done by the security system. It was done later by someone who used Memphis PD's proprietary video console. That means internal tampering. Camille froze. Can you prove it? I already did. It's in the system log. I matched the software signature to a device assigned to Detective Benjamin Grayson. Meanwhile, Camille received an anonymous email with no body text, just an attachment, a scanned police report from 3 years ago involving a kid named Maurice Holloway, charged for a robbery he never committed. The arresting officer, Grayson. The forensic evidence lost. Camille now had a pattern, and that made her dangerous. Isaac received another letter from her that week. This time it read, "We're going public." And on a chilly Thursday morning, a press conference was called on the steps of the Shelby County Courthouse. Camille stepped up to the mic, the case file in her hand, and dropped a bombshell that rocked the state. The media storm erupted like a hurricane. Every major outlet picked up the story. Conviction in jeopardy civil rights group alleges. Memphis man was framed. Grayson's name trended on social media for days, and Camille Reyes was dubbed a legal lioness by one network. Inside Portsville State, Isaac could feel the shift. Inmates nodded at him now. Some whispered, "Keep fighting, man." Even the guards toned down their cruelty, unsure where this was headed. Then finally the impossible happened. After 5 years of silence, Judge Randolph Keating reopened Isaac's case for evidentiary hearing. The same judge who had given him 60 years now wore a different expression. Uncertainty. Camilla was granted access to previously sealed evidence. In those files, she found one more piece of proof, a security log showing Grayson signed out the locker key used to fake the gun evidence 2 days before the warrant was issued. This was the break they needed. In his cold cell, Isaac received a final letter from Camille that week. "You've got a hearing next month. Pack light. You may not be coming back." For the first time in over 5 years, Isaac allowed himself to cry. Not from grief, but from the warmth of a hope that no longer felt fragile. The courtroom looked smaller than Isaac remembered. Or maybe he had grown hardened by 5 years of concrete and cold. Either way, the moment he was let in, shackled at the wrists and ankles, the gallery fell silent. On one side sat Camille, now joined by attorney Harlan DeWitt, a civil rights litigator with a reputation for dismantling corrupt prosecutions. On the other sat Prosecutor Stokes, older, grayer, and visibly nervous. Grayson was nowhere in sight. Judge Keating entered. No smile, no ceremony. "This court is convened to review new evidence in the matter of Isaac Monroe versus the state of Tennessee," he said. Harlan rose first. "Calm, collected, Your Honor. We submit that Mr. Monroe was convicted based on deliberately suppressed evidence, falsified police reports, and prosecutorial negligence. We intend to prove that not only was this conviction unjust, it was criminal." Stokes tried to object. "This is a media stunt." Keating cut him off. "Sit down." Camille's voice shook only once, and that was when she held up the altered footage. "Your Honor, this file was intentionally cropped to hide exculpatory footage. It was done by Detective Grayson using department software. That's not just misconduct. It's a violation of Mr. Monroe's constitutional rights." The judge blinked. The courtroom held its breath. The next morning, Harlan called a surprise witness, Angela Braith, the former student teacher from Isaac's classroom on the day of the robbery. She walked in visibly older but composed. The jury wasn't present. It wasn't a retrial yet, but the courtroom was packed with reporters and legal observers. "Every word mattered," Ms. Braith, Harlan began. "Were you with Mr. Monroe on the morning of March 18th, 2019? "Yes, I was helping him set up for parent night, and at approximately 11:42 a.m., the time of the robbery." She nodded firmly. "Yes, he was in the classroom with me the whole time. Did anyone ever ask you to testify during the original trial?" "No, I told the detective what I saw. I assumed they didn't need me." Harlan looked toward the prosecution table. "Detective Grayson took your statement." "He did. But when I followed up, he said the timeline no longer mattered." The courtroom rippled. Camille leaned forward, catching the judge's subtle flinch. Angela wasn't just a witness. She was the alibi they'd ignored. Outside news vans were already running headlines. "Key alibi. Witness never called. Misconduct confirmed for Isaac." It was as if his truth had finally grown a voice loud enough to be heard. Prosecutor Stokes didn't return to court that afternoon. Word had spread that the DOJ had opened a formal investigation into his past convictions, especially cases involving Grayson. Judge Keating, once firm in his convictions, now looked weathered by guilt. He reviewed each new exhibit surveillance logs, Grayson's forged warrant request, and finally the suppressed email from Stokes himself to the original DA. If we admit the timeline discrepancy, we lose the whole case. No footage, no problem. When this was read aloud in court, Camille saw Isaac flinch, not in fear but in rage. That single sentence had stolen 5 years of his life. The judge called a recess. The room emptied. Outside reporters swarmed Camille and Harlan. A journalist shouted, "Do you think the conviction will be overturned?" Camille didn't hesitate. It has to be. Inside his holding cell, Isaac sat still. There was no celebration yet. He knew systems didn't crumble easily. But he also knew this wasn't just cracks anymore. This was collapse. And somewhere in Memphis, Benjamin Grayson sat in his truck watching it all unfold from a distance because he knew his time was coming. And this time there'd be no locker to hide behind. Just when the defense thought they'd seen it all, Camille got a call from a blocked number. "Meet me, no names, parking lot behind the old train depot." It was risky, but she went. There in the dark stood Officer Raymond Tillis, a retired cop who had worked with Grayson. He didn't look well. His eyes were sunken, his breath short. "I can't sleep," he said. "It's been eating me alive." "What are you talking about?" "I was there when Grayson cut that footage. I didn't know who the kid was, but he laughed. Said, 'This one's gonna stick. Judge owes me a favor anyway.'" Camille froze. "You're willing to testify?" He nodded. "I'm dying. Might as well do something right." The next morning, Tillis took the stand. His voice cracked, but the words were clear. "We deleted the footage," Grayson said. "If anyone asked, it was corrupted. He made me sign off on the evidence transfer." Judge Keating looked like he might vomit. No more denials, no more doubt. That afternoon, the judge called both parties to chambers. "I'm not waiting on the DOJ," he said. "Prepare your client. I'm overturning the conviction." Camille's hands trembled. Isaac Monroe would walk free. The next morning, Camille entered Isaac's cell block with 2 guards flanking her. She handed him a freshly printed court order, stamped, signed, final. It read, "Conviction overturned and immediate release ordered." Isaac sat down on the metal cot, the paper crinkling in his hands. "That's it," he whispered. "I just leave." Camille nodded, tears brimming. "You don't owe them anything else." The walkout felt surreal. Inmates pounded the walls in solidarity. "Free at last," someone shouted. Even the guards stood back, watching something they couldn't stop. Outside, the sun was blinding. He hadn't felt sunlight on his face without chain-link shadows. In 5 years, Camille waited with a car. She handed him clean clothes, a phone, a credit card, and a job offer. She added, smiling, "You're a hell of a writer. Thought you might want to help us with outreach, help others like you." Isaac didn't speak for a long time, just sat in the passenger seat, letting the moment wrap around him. And then he whispered, "Let's go find the next one," because he wasn't just free, he was reborn. 2 months later, Isaac Monroe stood in front of a chalkboard again. Not as an inmate, not even as a plaintiff, but as a guest speaker. The classroom belonged to Ms. Porter, one of the few teachers who had fought for his innocence early on. She had invited him to speak to her 10th grade civics class about justice and resilience. "Ever been inside a courtroom?" Isaac asked the students. A few hands shot up. Most didn't. "Well, I have, for 5 years straight." Gasps. Whispers. He paused. "I didn't do what they said I did, but the system didn't care. Not until someone outside made enough noise." He explained the importance of evidence, of accountability, of advocacy. He told them how he almost gave up and how Camille saved him by refusing to... A student raised her hand. "Would you go back to teaching?" Isaac smiled, soft and honest. "Maybe. But for now, I'm teaching like this, one classroom at a time after class." Miss Porter hugged him. "You belong here, Isaac. Maybe not in this exact room, but in this fight." And for the first time in years, he agreed. He didn't want revenge. He wanted redemption. Meanwhile, in a windowless courtroom across town, Benjamin Grayson finally stood where Isaac once had, as the defendant. Federal charges, evidence tampering, civil rights violations, perjury. He sat stone-faced as the prosecutor listed the charges. Camille seated 2 rows behind him, silently watching. She didn't smile. This wasn't about triumph, it was about truth. One by one, former officers testified. So did Angela Braith. So did Officer Tillis's widow, reading her husband's sworn statement. Grayson tried to argue it was all politics, that he was just doing his job. But the documents didn't lie. Neither did the timelines, or the people whose lives he shattered. The judge, a no-nonsense federal appointee, looked Grayson in the eye. "You didn't just fail your badge. You corrupted the very meaning of justice." He was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. Camille left quietly, but outside reporters swarmed. Ms. Bishop, do you believe this is justice? She turned to the cameras. It's a start, but justice would have meant Isaac never went to prison at all. And with that, she walked away toward a future still heavy with work, because real justice is never a finish line. 3 months after his release, Isaac wrote a letter, not to Grayson, not to Judge Keating, but to every kid who'd ever been told their voice didn't matter. He published it online. It went viral within days. They buried me under lies, under fear, under silence. But a seed grows in darkness. They called me angry, I was. They called me dangerous, I wasn't. They called me guilty, I wasn't. But now I'm calling them out, not just for me, but for all of us, still trapped in the shadows. If you're out there wondering if anyone sees you, I do. We do. You're not invisible. You're not disposable. You're not done. Keep fighting. Keep rising. Even from the grave, truth grows. The letter was shared by teachers, activists, even members of Congress. For Isaac, it was a release louder than any verdict. And it echoed in schools, courtrooms, and living rooms across the country. Camille didn't rest. Her inbox was full of letters from across the country, mothers, brothers, people who said, my son is just like Isaac, or they never let us speak. One caught her eye. A young woman in Texas had been sentenced for arson, despite no fingerprints and a clear alibi. Her public defender never showed up for the sentencing. Camille booked a flight that night. Isaac joined her at the airport. Another fire to walk into? She grinned. We're fireproof by now. As they boarded, Isaac looked out at the tarmac, remembering the times he'd stared out from barred windows, wondering if he'd ever see a sky unbroken by steel. Now he had wings and a mission. They weren't just clearing names, they were building a bridge over the wreckage, and every step forward made the past matter less. Not because they forgot, but because they were finally rewriting the ending. 1 year after his exoneration, Isaac stood on stage at a justice reform conference in Atlanta. The room was packed with educators, lawyers, former inmates, and students. He opened with a question. How many of you know someone wrongfully accused? Hands rose, too many. How many of you think the system is broken? More hands, he nodded. I'm not here to convince you it is, you already know. I'm here to remind you it can be fixed and that we don't need heroes, we need each other. He told them his story, not the prison part, but the hope part, the part where a teacher remembered, where a lawyer refused to let go, where a broken man refused to stay broken. As he stepped off the stage, a student ran up to him. Eyes wide, Mr. Monroe, my brother's locked up for something he didn't do. Will you help? Isaac bent down, took the boy's hand and said, yes, let's begin. Because justice isn't a courtroom, it's a choice. Every day, every story, every name. The justice system isn't flawless, but silence allows injustice to thrive. Sometimes all it takes is one voice to shatter the walls of corruption. Isaac Monroe's story reminds us that truth can survive even the deepest burial, and that redemption often begins with belief.